I apologise because this is the same PowerPoint that I've had for ages. Can you see that?
Yep.
Can you see the screen? Yeah. I need to get some new photos so it's not just looking at the same old thing. Okay. Right, we will just start going through this. So this is the Cox's induction course. I'm just going to go through most of it. And I'm going to cut out some bits because we just want to get through it in about an hour and a half if possible, because I think that's long enough on Zoom. Right. Actually, can I put that down there? Right, I'm just going to try and...
I turned it down, just see if you think, before you go, just see if you think it's kind of all right to keep going.
Okay, right. Can everyone see the full screen now? Oh, yeah, you're on mute, aren't you? Right. Okay, so the competent Cox. This is just to make sure we've got somebody who's quite happy to be in charge of the boat, really, and who knows what they're doing. So there's things they should have done before they start, checking the forecast, knowing what the tides are like, etc. before you go out. They should have gone through this course, and we've got a checklist, we've got a Cox's checklist to make sure that they know all the relevant information and it's clear what's expected. And new Coxes won't just be thrown in, they'll be accompanied by an experienced Cox at the beginning when they go out, really until they're happy, until we're happy that you're happy. So there'll be a competent Cox signed up for each row, and that doesn't mean that they have to Cox for the whole trip, but they are in charge of the boat. And if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and ask as we go along. Okay, so a competent Cox in charge of each row. All members should take a go at Coxing when out. That would be ideal, really. It helps people just get a feel of the boat, and I think it actually probably makes you a better rower if you understand what the rowing does to the boat when you're Coxing. It would also let people get used to steering the boat and giving the commands. Yeah, gives you a better understanding of managing the boat. If you're having a short go at Coxing, you're not in charge of the boat. It's the actual Cox who's in charge of the boat. And the reason this would be good is to share out the Coxing duties. Now, obviously, with COVID at the moment, we've just got the Cox Coxing the boat for the whole time. We are thinking about changing that over to being so that the Cox and the stroke can swap part the way through the session. But obviously we're a lot more limited than we normally are with this. Oops, happy crew. Okay, basic rules of using an Esquimalt skiff. So the Cox is in command of the skiff. Life jackets will be provided for everyone in the boat and must be worn at all times. Obviously now quite a few of us have bought our own life jackets, but we'll always have some spares with us. So if somebody forgets theirs, then we will still be able to provide one, and nobody gets in the boat without having a life jacket on. Rowers must be in good health. Should ask everyone before they go out. So are they feeling well, but also are they injured in any way? And rowers are advised to bring drinking water and clothes for the cold or the wet or the heat, just appropriate, whatever you need. And bring extra clothes if you're Coxing, because it does get cold, particularly in the winter. And yeah, difficult weather conditions. It can be quite fun, but it has to be safe. So in doubt, don't go out. Here's us. That's Dee Dee's launch, I think. Does anyone want to say anything at all?
Just a couple of quick things, George. I think in terms of the cox's clothes, I think that's one of the reasons why we're having the discussion about whether cox and stroke should be allowed to swap over. If we can be satisfied we can do that safely, because as we get back to rowing towards the end of November, it is going to be very cold for the cox sitting there for a session of about an hour and a half. So I think we'll have a conversation between the existing coxes and decide that. But you can get very, very cold. So lots of socks, lots of layers. And the other thing about the weather is if it is marginal, because Gaynor and I are right by the harbour, if somebody's coxing, if it's like, for example, Brian, if you were coxing, it's quite difficult to see from Eskbank what it's like in Eskmouth. So always drop us a text or give us a call, and we're quite happy to go over and have a look at the harbour for those people, or Owen, obviously, who can look out of his window and see it. So there's always some of us nearby the harbour who are quite happy to kind of check the weather. So if you are living further afield, never be afraid to kind of drop a text or something if you're too far away or can't get down.
Can I just ask if we'll get a link? Can we get a copy of these slides afterwards?
Yes, I can write it to a PowerPoint and send it out.
Thanks, George. Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing, just about what David was saying about the cox and the stroke swapping over, I mean, it's good for the winter for the cox, but also with the stroke, because the stroke's the only person that actually has to row with a mask on all the time, and I think people are finding it quite difficult sometimes, so it would also give them literally a bit of a breather, where they're not trying to row with a mask on. Obviously they'll still have it on when they're coxing, but you're not exerting yourself as much. So there's sort of a double reason to do that. So the role of the cox.
Sorry, George.
Uh-huh. Maybe
I missed something. I thought it was only if the cox wanted that the stroke had to wear a mask.
I don't know, we were talking about, I think that the stroke is going to have to wear a mask. I don't know, well, we need to clarify this before we restart, but Carrie-Anne and I we'll clarify it before we start. The view seems to be that people would like definite rules, I think.
No, that's fine. I just thought maybe I missed a change or something in the rules. Okay.
Right, getting back to the slide. So the cox is the captain of the boat and is responsible for the safety. The cox really needs to check the weather forecasts before they come. So they need to know what the weather's due to be doing, the wind, if the wind's going to change direction, if it's going to get stronger, if it's due to rain. So they need to be really well aware of that. They need to make sure that they've got the contact details for all the crew in case the session needs to be cancelled. Quite often we have to contact David to pass on the details as the club's getting bigger, really, and there are more and more people in it. It's the cox's decision about whether the session goes ahead or not, as they have to be happy to go out coxing in the conditions, but they should also check with the rowers to see that they're happy as well. They need to have an adequate means of communication in the boat, so mobile phones which need to be charged and the VHF radio, and they need to know how to use that. I mean, really, we're always within mobile phone coverage, but also we always do have the VHF radios in the boat and they will always be charged up. So the cox should know the timing of the tides and the height of the tide, so that they know how much time they've got for rowing. Obviously, you've usually got your session time, but it's also useful to know what the tide is doing and when you run out of water in the harbour.
George, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
You see, when you said about having a mobile phone to phone, who would you phone?
You can phone 999 and that gets you through to the Coast Guard as well as the police.
Thank you. I just hadn't like that. I thought I wouldn't know who to phone.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. So the cox is the person who usually steers the boat down the slipway. Obviously, you have to do that safely. And I'll put that again. You should ask rowers if they're feeling unwell or injured. So I've already said that. So with new rowers, the cox needs to show them how to inflate their life jackets and adjust the footrests and give basic rowing instructions before they start rowing. The cox also has to balance the crew in the boat. So you have to be balanced in terms of weight and strength. You can't have like both of your strong rowers on the same side of the boat, otherwise you go around in circles. And you also have to cater for new rowers. So I usually put new rowers in seat number 2, just in front of the bow, because it means that they're rowing on the same side as the stroke, and it makes it easy for them to see the stroke oar, so that it just makes it easier to get their timing at the beginning, I think. And obviously the cox is responsible for steering the boat. They should keep aware of their surroundings at all times, particularly in harbours and during races. And I suppose when the sea's busy, we know when the yachts are out, and increasingly over the summer, I suppose there were more canoeists and paddle boarders and everybody out now. So she'll ensure that the crew is aware of appropriate safety procedures at any time. So you've just got to let the rowers know if they've got to do anything at any point. They're also responsible for coaching the crew. So yeah, sort of letting people know what they're doing. I suppose sometimes it's actually like formal coaching, but otherwise you can just like keep people along the right lines. Keep your commands clear and speak loudly. Right, I had a look at, it's always worth checking out what North Berwick are saying about things every now and then. So I had a look at their website a wee while ago, and to do with the weather, they only actually had 2 sort of weather and conditions related rules for taking their boats out. One of the rules was don't take the boat out if conditions are due to deteriorate. And it's always worth checking out what the weather is doing, because like as this forecast here shows, like I'd actually done a screen grab of this for something else, but the weather is almost always it's more still. That's not a good phrase, is it? In the morning. It usually always gets windier during the day. So just be aware of what the wind's going to do. We are really lucky as well. I'm just looking at the North Berwick instructions and reflecting on it. We've got the harbour. So when we go out, we've always got the harbour that we can come back to. Whereas a lot of clubs, they're coming back to a beach. So if the conditions deteriorate, then it can make quite a big difference. Like we probably get a bit more leeway than North Berwick because we're further into the Forth, and also because we've got the harbour to come back to, which really protects us when we're landing. But you need to just be aware of what's going to happen. Right, does anyone want to say anything about any of that? Okay, this is us. That's Dee Dee's launch. Right, launching at Fisher Row Harbour. So there's a few things that are quite important. So with the trailers, the winches can come unlocked sometimes, particularly on Steedy's trailer, which is the one with the rollers on it. So before you take the boat down the slipway, always make sure that the band's actually locked. So that keeps the boat in place on the trailer. Put the chocks down on the beach and make sure that there's nobody on the beach. So sometimes in a normal summer, there will be people down there with their kids. So you have to let them know that we're going to bring a boat down, and just make sure they keep the kids out of the way. Make sure that no one's downhill of the trailer wheels when the boat is wheeled down the slipway, and check that the bung is in once the boat is down the slipway. Now, the thing to say about this is if the tide's in when you're launching the boat, and so the water's already at the bottom of the slipway, you have to have the bung in before you put the boat down. Otherwise, somebody's going to have to sort of stand in the sea and put the bung in. So that's just one thing to remember about that. And these are old instructions. So it says decide whether the trailer can be left on the beach or needs to be put back up in the parking area. At the moment, we're always putting the trailer back up on the triangle. It's just what we've decided to do for the COVID rules. But normally, if the tide is going to come up above 5.2 metres, then the trailer should definitely be put back up on the harbour side. In the winter, sometimes, if the tide was going to be a lot lower than that, then we could just leave them on the beach. 5.2 is around about the point where the water is up at the bottom of the slipway, so it means you can't then get the trailer back into the right position to get your boat out. And the boat can be launched stern first unless it's very windy in the harbour. So I think stern first is the way we normally launch, and I think there's only been a few times we've actually had to launch bow first in the harbour, just when it's been really pretty windy and the wind's been catching the boat.
Sorry, George, what's the likelihood of being able to go outside the harbour to row if it's too windy in the harbour to launch stern first?
You can. It really depends on which way the wind is blowing. I mean, it can be really pretty windy from some directions. Yeah, I mean, there have been quite a few occasions where it's been windy and we've managed to row.
Okay.
Like windy enough to have to launch like that in the harbour. Plus also you've always got the option of rowing in the harbour, which is another thing we've done, I think. Yeah. When it's been pretty windy. Right, so these rules are actually East Lothian Council's rules relating to Fisher Row Harbour. So these are the old rules. The new rules have been written up by the Harbour and Seafront Association. And it's quite funny, actually. Anyway, so I don't think the new rules actually have the rule about 3 knots in it, but I'll just leave that there anyway. You have to make sure that you lock the gate when you're not, after you've launched the boat, and you're not allowed to let anyone else use the slipway. You're not allowed to let other people just run after you. An issue. Rowing from Fisher Row Harbour. So we have there's enough water for us to row out of the harbour approximately 2 hours either side of high tide. When it's a very low high tide, we get about 3.5 hours. And when we've got a sort of 6 metre tide, then we have about 5 hours of water around about high tide. So that would be 2.5 hours before, 2.5 hours afterwards.
George?
Yeah.
Is it the harbour rules? Does it include kayaks, for example? Can you launch a kayak from the harbour?
I guess you probably can, in that you can. I don't actually know what the official rules are about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get your kayak under the gate, so you don't need a key. So I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you'd have somebody chasing after you for some money.
Okay, I'll risk it. Thank you.
So on the Fisher Row Yacht Club website, there's a tides calendar, which you can get to with this link, or if you actually just go on and then you choose calendars and then the tide calendar, it has a really nice graphic that David Banks has done that shows you a block of time when there is enough water to launch. It's actually for the sailors to get in out of the harbour, but it's exactly the same amount of water that we need to launch the boats. So it just gives you a coloured block. I think I've got a thing coming up after that. And for more general information about tides, there's the Tides for Fishing website. And this, if you look up Cockenzie, it's the nearest one to us, and their tide times are exactly the same as ours, and you can use the tide heights there as well. There's also a really nice Tides app, which I can put a link to afterwards, which is not actually so good for Fisher Row, but it's really good for showing you when high tide is and like, whether it's a big tide or a small tide. Right, this next rule says take the eastern route around the boats from the slipway to the harbour mouth. Right, I'll just put the next. All right, that's the graphic. That's just to jump back a bit. That's David Banks's calendar that he's made for the Fisher Row Yacht Club. So the blue box here is when we can get out of the harbour. So on this particular day, high tide was at 14:21 and it's a 5 metre tide, and that meant we could have rowed any time between 12 o'clock and 4:21 that afternoon. So it's really useful for us. Right, to go back to which way we should go out of the harbour. Now, funnily enough, when they produced the new harbour rules for the Harbour and Seafront Association, I couldn't find this rule in the rules. So I asked them about it and they said, oh no, that's never been a rule. So I've got absolutely no idea why I put this in as a rule, but somebody obviously said to me at some point, and it does make really good sense. So if you go out of the harbour to the right, so towards the Cookenzie Way, and out here, I'm hoping you can see my cursor here, because it means that when you get to this bit here, just before you go out the entrance, you've got a really good view of anyone who's coming into the harbour, and they've got a really good view of you. They can see that you're coming out of the harbour. So by default, I would always recommend going out of the harbour this way. If you come round the other way, when the boat gets to here, you can't really see around the corner to see who's coming, and anyone who's coming in here can't actually see you until you get to there, by which time you might both be in the same place. I mean, we've never had a problem, but I would always say to go out of the harbour this way. Right, returning to Fisher Row Harbour. I'll put that slide up again in a minute. So make sure that you have a clear view of the harbour entrance before you go back in. I'll just go back to the... Right, so really when you're coming back in, you should be coming in like this. So wherever you've been in the boat, if you've been over here, like on the East Beach, or if you've been at Portobello, just try and get yourself in a position, like come round quite wide so that you're actually coming in on a straight line into the harbour. Like don't just nip round this wall here, because if you do that, again, you can't see what's happening, people can't see you. So always try and come round here, and that way you've got a clear view into the harbour, and then come round this way. With the sailing boats in the summer, it's worth checking over the wall. If you're approaching in the direction I just said, then you can have a look to see if there's any masts moving in the harbour. So if you can see that a boat's about to come out, then just do another circle outside or something and wait for them to come out before you go in. It just means that you're all not in the harbour mouth at the same time. And if if a sailing boat has just gone into the harbour, give it time to manoeuvre into place before following it in. Particularly some of the boats, I think the sailing boats, they have to go in and then they have to catch their anchor and then they have to spin round. So it's just, not their anchor, their mooring buoy. So it's just easier to give them time. So again, just go and do another wee loop and then come back into the harbour afterwards. Does that all make sense to everyone? Does anyone want to ask any questions about that?
George, can I just ask, have you ever had a training session for new coxes in the harbour, about the harbour in the boat? Because I think that's the part that makes me the most nervous about coxing, is controlling the boat while you're in the harbour.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. I was actually thinking it's probably, when I was just going over this morning, I was thinking it's probably worthwhile actually going over some of the things like going in and out of the harbour, manoeuvring with people actually in the boat. Obviously, it's a bit more restricted at the moment because we could only let people have a go one at a time. But yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I think one of the challenges, Amy, that we've had is the boats sort of drifting from the harbour wall, particularly when it's windy, and the channel where we do go out. It's not so bad at the moment with most of the boats being out, but when all the boats are in the harbour, obviously it can be quite narrow. So it is quite important to practice that. Sorry, just a couple of other things to reinforce what George said. Always look at the forecast and always kind of err on the side of caution. I'm probably not the ideal person to say that, but it sometimes the forecast doesn't tell you enough. So you might look at the forecast and think, and George is going to talk about the wind speeds later, but sometimes you might think, oh, that looks fine. But even if it's slightly marginal, there are times when the forecast looks fine and actually it's not, usually to do with the weather that's maybe been around the previous couple of days. And sometimes it looks marginal and you think, I'm not going to be able to row, but actually go and have a look and actually it's fine. So always, if it's marginal, it's always best to have a look. And just in terms of the timing of the sessions, that Fisher Row Yacht Club calendar is really brilliant, actually. And what you'll tend to find is what we'll try and do is sometimes the sessions will begin 15 minutes before to allow that first session not to waste any time on the water. So we add another 15 minutes on at the start to allow people to get the boat ready. So by the time you're down at the bottom, we're maximising the amount of time we can get in the water.
Yep, thank you, David. Yeah, these are all good points. Right, where are we going next? Right, terms in the boat. I think people really know this now. We used to get muddled up with our numbers, but basically the bow is seat number 1, stroke is seat number 4. So let's go past that. Right, launching from the beach. So sometimes we have to launch from the beach, sometimes it's Portobello Beach. We're trying to make more of the tide now. So in some cases we're launching from the beach if we're kind of short of time, particularly now. I suppose we're going to be short of daylight as well when the tide's in. So just down at the bottom there, I've written that we can launch when there's around about 3 meters of water on the tide level. And the best place to find that is on the Tides app. So I'll actually put in, I think I've got another graphic showing you what the Tides app is somewhere else. So I'll add that in, or I can send the Tides information out to people. So in those occasions we are launching from the beach. You can either, if there's any sort of waves, you're better launching bow first. So all the rowers would get in, and the cox is the last person to get in, and we actually launch without the rudder on, so the cox can just keep, I'll get onto that in a minute. So anyway, the crew get in, reverse order the bow rower first from what we normally do. The cox will keep the boat steady until the crew have adjusted their footrests and got their oars on, etc. And the quite important thing to remember when you're launching from the beach is that you need to keep the boat at 90 degrees to the waves and not 90 degrees to the beach. So you basically just need to keep walking the stern of the boat along the beach so that the boat is facing straight into the waves, because as soon as the waves start hitting the boat, even slightly side on, it'll start to push the boat round. And if it's doing that when you're in the beach area, it just quickly sort of deteriorates, and then quite often like people might have to get out again and start again, because you don't want it won't actually tip the boat most of the time, but it may sort of tip it over. You mean it's not going to turn it over, but but you can do that. You can launch into waves from the beach.
Can I just,
yeah.
George, you're probably going to go on to say this, but I think one of the things that can happen there quite quickly is that you can get lots of water in the boat. So people would need to get out, but not just that, it can be very, very difficult to pull the boat back in because it fills up quite quickly. And I'm just wondering whether when we've had those situations, which have been rare, we should maybe always maybe use a case study example, you know, just to show what can happen, because it's quite easy for it to happen.
Yes, yep. We can try to do that. I mean, I suppose in these, probably the thing to say about this is because, well, one thing to say about it is in most cases, when we're launching from the beach, we've probably got a choice about it. Like what the thing I've just talked about is actually when we want to get out early and you're launching from the beach. So if the conditions were rough, you probably wouldn't do that. Also with so if we're not launching from the beach to get out early, then it'll either be because we've landed at, well, sometimes we've landed at Portobello or we've landed at Fisher Row on the beach. But I suppose the thing to bear in mind about this is you've always got a choice about that. So if the conditions are at all rough at Portobello and you've got doubts about landing or launching, just don't do it. You know, just stay out and then come back to the harbour. I know, like we used to do our training, or what were they called? Not training sessions, taster sessions. That's right. And whenever we did taster sessions, it was always a rough day for some reason. So yeah, you have to just be quite thoughtful about whether you're going to land on the beach and launch again, I suppose. But yeah, we could definitely sort of try and do like a case study. We could try and film it going right, and then we could point out what goes wrong. Maybe we could do that, or let it go slightly wrong, but not too much. Would that? Does that sound right, Veronica? Do you think that would help?
I think it would. I mean, we can always use the example of the seriously rough one at Stranraer, because we filmed most of that, so we might be able to get a still from it or something. But that was extremely rough, wasn't it? So it's a bit of an extreme example. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I still have the bruise under my jaw where the boat hit me. It came whacking up and hit me under the chin. Luckily, I have a jaw of steel. But yeah, I think I've still got that bruise. Wow, I felt it.
Yeah. And Alison at the back of her head as well, I think, when she fell in later on.
That's right.
I know, and in that case, we actually had somebody hanging off the back of the boat, didn't we, to keep it down, to stop the bow from going up too much. So, that was very, very extreme for us.
When we did the Inchcolm one, was it a couple of years ago now, that was the waves coming into Kinghorn were really bad. So launching was quite interesting, and actually landing was really, really interesting. And I think that's when coming in, one of the boats capsized as well. So
it did. And I think, I mean, when we went out at Kinghorn, we definitely went out bow first.
Yeah.
I think we actually got right out over the breakers before we put the rudder on. So that was just a case of like telling which rowers they had to row, because we just didn't have the option of putting the rudder on. We just had to get out over the breakers into calmer water before we carried on. Again, these again are sort of, if that had just been a rowing session at home, we probably wouldn't have launched in waves like we had at Kinghorn, and we certainly wouldn't have launched in waves like we were having at Stranraer, I think. So.
No.
Right.
It was certainly interesting to row in. I don't think I'd want to be coxing in it.
Yeah.
Just on that, is it worth mentioning that, you know, if you are rowing without the rudder on, you know, for whatever launching or for whatever reason, just mentioning if you're coxing, you can control the boat with your rowers on either side, and just increasing or decreasing the strength of rowing on each side, just to steer the boat so that newer coxes, just to be aware that you can do that. So it's not all is not lost if you don't have the rudder on the boat.
Yeah, I mean that's actually completely essential, because I think I was coxing when we did launch at Kinghorn, and because it's quite difficult to stay at 90 degrees to the wave, like sometimes you were just having to ask one side of the boat to row all the time. So yeah, that's a really important point. Right, before we go on to, does anyone else want to say anything else before we go on? I realised actually I haven't put in a slide about landing on the beach. I don't quite know why I haven't got a slide in about that. Again, when you're landing on the beaches, it's quite important to come in at 90 degrees to the waves and not the beach. And you just to try and make sure that the waves are coming in right behind the boat and not at an angle. And you need to get your bow rower to jump out as soon as they can, just so they can hold the boat steady, and then everybody else just has to sort of get out as quickly as they can. Sometimes we'll do the oars first and sometimes we won't. Like sometimes you just need to get out and then pull the boat up and then do the oars afterwards. I seem to remember at the last training we had a discussion about drogues. A drogue is like a sea anchor, which can slow you down as you're coming into the beach. I think we have one which we've never actually rigged up, and I'm kind of reluctant to get involved with them because we, as a rule, don't land on the beach most of the time. We've always got the option of coming back to the harbour, and I think drogues are probably something you need to get used to using. So it may be something we can do a bit of training in at some point, but I don't think we'll really go for it as an essential bit of Esthmuth kit. When you're coming into a beach, when it's really quite rough, one thing that you can do to slow you coming in a bit is that you can actually get the crew to do backwaters, which slows down the speed that you're going to hit the beach at. I don't think we've really tried that very much. And another thing I've read about is that you can actually turn the boat round and come in backwards. So the rowers will be rowing normally, which will really slow the boat down, and it slows down the speed at which you're going to be sort of rammed into the beach. But again, if it's like that, we should just not be landing on the beach, and we should be going back to the harbour. Does anyone want to say anything at all there?
Hi, George. I'm conscious that a few times when we have landed at Porty and the waves have come over into the boat, I know I was stroke both times, and it was the case that the stroke and the cox worked pretty closely together until we got to a point where we could get out of the boat. But it was pretty hairy, has to be said, and both of us got absolutely drenched, particularly the cox, actually.
Yeah. You've got the disadvantage when you're the cox that you can't actually see what's coming behind you. And also at Portobello Beach, depending on how far the tide is out, when you're landing, the angle of the beach really changes quite a lot. So there's a bit where Portobello gets quite steep, like some of Fisher Row Beach does. So at that point, if you're coming in like that, then the stern of the boat where the cox is sitting and the stroke might be quite lower than the top, if you know what I mean, than the bow. I think we just have to be quite cautious. We have to get a bit more canny about looking at which I think we have done actually, looking at the sea and the beach and thinking, right, do we really want to land there today, or do we just not want to bother, you know, because we've always got the option of just rowing out on the water and not landing. So yeah, that's what I would say. Because it's not good. It's not good when we've landed and the waves have come over the back of the boat, and then you've got to bail it out and the cox is wet and everything. It's not particularly a good situation to get into. Right. Let me just does anyone want to just have a general chat for a few minutes?
You go. Everybody's should be. Oh,
No, you're doing great, George.
Am
No.
I? All right. Okay.
Oh, this is
You
really
win,
good,
just
George.
tell us.
Thanks. Just keep going.
Okay. Right. Avoiding collisions in our local area. So we have really got quite a lot of open sea near us, but we've got fixed hazards such as the harbour, the rocks along the coast, and the groins at Portobello Beach. We've also got quite a lot of people, water users, swimmers, kayakers, sailing boats, jet skis, other skiffs. I would be, when you're at Portobello, you have to be quite aware if the swimmers are out, you have to really keep quite a good lookout for them. That's one thing I would say, which can mean the cocks sort of sitting up on the back just to make sure there's no one out and about, because they are quite small when they're in the water. Sailing boats are really obvious to see and avoid. They should be, although sometimes they seem to decide to sort of circle us, which is really quite unnerving, because you don't know if they're coming towards you because they're having a bit of a laugh, or if they're coming towards you because they haven't actually seen you. But anyway, when you meet another vessel, motor gives way to muscle, which gives way to wind. So the motorboats and the jet skis should give way to us, or the sailing boats if they've got their motors on as opposed to their sails up. And we give way to yachts under sail, and that's really just because it's easier for us to stop. You know, we can stop in a few meters really, and whereas they can't. So it's just a case of keeping yourself safe as well, really, just in keeping out of the way. If you're really not sure what people are doing, like the motorboats should give way to us, and they do, but sometimes they cut it a bit close. So if they're being, sometimes it's better just to clear out the way of them altogether, just go somewhere else, I think. If you're overtaking somebody, you have to make sure that you keep well clear of them. This applies in races as well as everything else. But it is the overtaking vessel which has the responsibility to keep out of the way. An overtaking vessel can't expect the other boat to keep out of their way, particularly when they maybe can't even see them. Right, steering. Well, the first bit's obvious once you've had a go. You're moving the tiller in the opposite direction to the one you want to go. That's just something that comes naturally after a while. Ideally, you want to keep the boat pointing straight into the waves, meeting them at 90 degrees. Again, the waves will just go evenly down both sides of the boat. And any movement you make with the rudder will slow down the boat. So this is something we need to keep aware of in races as well. So you can use the rowers easing off on one side or etc. to steer the boat. I've put holding water there, but you wouldn't really get them to hold water unless you were turning. But one thing to bear in mind is, and this is something I wish everybody who rows could realise, that when you stop the boat and you ask people to take their oars out the water, if somebody keeps the rower in the water, that immediately turns the boat. I think we had a go at some of this with the Cox's training, just when we were actually on the water trying this out. So if anyone just dips their oar in the water, it will turn the boat because it's just unbalancing it. And I think if somebody needs to fix something, like they need to stop rowing, then it's always, and particularly if it's quite a windy day and you want the other rowers to keep going, then keep two of your rowers rowing, one on each side, and get the other person who's not fixing, like the sort of partner of the person who's fixing their shoe or whatever, to stop rowing as well. So then you've still got one oar on each side of the boat rowing, and that'll stop the boat from turning as well. So practice without the rudder, I've said. So yeah, that's probably quite a good thing that people could do. And if you feel like the boat keeps turning in one direction, then you can actually let go of the rudder and you can just see which way it's turning, and that lets you know sometimes if you need to change your crew round. Not that we can really do that at the moment. So safety wise, you want to avoid being side onto the waves, because it's just not a good place to be really. So if you've got quite big waves, plan your turns. So sometimes you'll get a sort of slight lull in the waves, so look for that and carry out your turn quickly. So your steering, steering is affected by the oars, the speed of the boat, currents, tides, the wind, and sort of which direction the wind's coming from and how strong it is. And the steering, as I've already said, is affected by the balance of the crew. So that's why it's important that you do try to balance your crew. And this is really important if you're going out into quite a high sea, where you might not have the opportunity so easily to change your crew once you're out. I mean, that's not so much the case when we're rowing from Fisher Row, but it's a good thing. Just trying to balance the strength of your crew is a really good thing to always do. And I must admit, when we started rowing at the beginning of when we were allowed to row with all the COVID restrictions in place, you were so busy thinking about masks and sanitizer and all that, and we hadn't been in the boat for a while, and it's only you think things like balancing the crew kind of went out of your head slightly, so it's something that we need to remember to do. Right, tides, waves and weather, right. All right, these are just general points. Does anyone want to say anything about any of that, by the way? Anything to do with that?
Just on the turns, it is, I mean, nothing, I'm sure, you know, George has said this already, nothing kind of replicates, nothing beats learning actually on the sea. And it's actually being on the sea where you do most of your learning. Turns, I think, however many times you do a turn, always think about who's in the boat, and somebody who's in the boat might not have ever done a turn in quite rough waves. So if you do have to execute a turn quickly, make sure you explain in the run up to it very, very clearly what you're expecting each side to do. So be very, very clear. If stroke side are holding or bow side are holding, actually call people by their names, because some people, particularly when they're newer to rowing, might be a bit nervous about what they're supposed to do and they might just panic a little bit. So just give them really, really clear, really straightforward instructions about turning. And as George says in the slide, just try and execute the turn very quickly when you do it. The boats are surprisingly secure and, you know, stable. And as we all know, occasionally you do get caught by a wave a little bit, but the boat copes really, really clear instructions to all the rowers, telling them by name what you expect of them, and thinking who's in the boat and if they've ever done that before.
Yeah, that's right. And I think also what David's saying, sometimes if you've got a choice about which way you do the turn, then if you're trying to do it quickly, you would maybe like pick the more experienced side to do the turn, or stronger rowers or something.
Sorry, George, one thing you talk about a lot, George, is when you're going out, well, actually when you're rowing out in a quite a strong, you know, big wave sea, it's actually quite easy. The boat just rides the waves. It's nice and simple generally for the rowers. It's hard going, but it's easy to control the boat. Sometimes when you turn back and the waves are then coming under the boat, and as a cox you can't see as well what's happening behind, you do get this strange feeling of the waves coming under you, and the boat is kind of aquaplaning across the top of the waves a little bit. That's something that's very quite important to be aware of as a new cox. It is a very, very strange feeling. And, you know, just to be aware of that when you turn and the waves are coming from behind you, it does feel very, very different. You'll know that from rowing, but as a cox, it can be a little bit unnerving. And again, it's something to get used to, and you just really have to get used to it by experience.
Yes, it's really not very nice.
George, I have a wee query. So we've had quite a few new folks, and some of us might not have been in the boat with them. So, and I know this will just be a case of probably suck it and see when you're in the boat, but of course, normally under non-COVID, we could move people around, but under COVID, we can't. So I'm guessing at the moment, it's a case of you get people in the boat, you don't really know one of them very well because I don't mean weight, I mean strength. Although weight always it isn't obvious either. And I guess what you just have to do is that first time when you're out, say, okay, and try and balance the boat in terms of so-and-so, could you go a bit stronger? So-and-so, could you go a bit lighter? Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's already been in the boat at all, and you maybe haven't coxed them, but somebody else has, you can sort of ask what, you know, what they're like. But yeah, I mean, if you get to the stage where you're out and you've maybe got people you don't know and the boat has ended up being a bit unbalanced, you just have to really ask the stronger side to ease off.
Yeah.
And it's the only thing you can do really until you've got a chance to what we'd need to do now, God, if you really wanted to swap people, you need to get people to sanitize 2 of the seats in the boat sort of thing and then swap round. You need to do that in the harbour.
Exactly. And I think at the moment it is just sort of trying to balance it with stronger, ease off, stronger, ease off. Okay.
Yeah. And also at the moment, because it's quite tricky to take brand new rowers out because you don't know what they're going to be like, and if they fall off their seat, they're going to land on the person behind, then we've actually just decided not to take any new rowers out at the moment this session, this year.
Thank you.
Right. So, tides, waves and weather. Right, so these are just general points about the tide and what it does around us. So when the tide's coming in, it's flowing towards Portobello. So basically the tide comes in, it fills up the Forth, and when it goes out, it's emptying the Forth again. So when the tide's going out, it'll be going towards Cockenzie. Yeah, so the waves are largely created by the prevailing wind at the time. This is sort of the case most of the time. But even on a still day, a swell can roll in from the North Sea if a strong easterly wind has been blowing in the previous few days. So this is definitely the case. And when there's a swell on the sea, it can actually look incredibly calm. It doesn't even look like you'll all have seen this from being out in the boat. It doesn't even look like waves. It's just a general sort of the sea going up and down. I remember there was one day we were out a couple of months ago, and the sea looked incredibly calm. And we were going along to Portobello, and I was coxing, and I just looked at the sea, and it's interesting because you would have almost said it was flat, but then at one point I realized that my head was below the sea, sort of off to the right of me. So I thought it was calm, but there was actually quite a big swell going. And those northerly or easterly swells produce large breaking waves, because when the swell hits the beach, it's like a metre high wave, I suppose, hitting the beach. The next slide show why, all right, okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is what happens when waves hit the beach, and this includes the swell as well, because of the way our beach is, because we've got a north-facing beach. Then this is why you get such large waves when there's a northerly or easterly swell, because with a northerly wind, the winds had a chance to blow right the way across the Forth, and if it's kind of northeasterly, then it's actually blowing right in from the North Sea. So those waves have actually come quite a long way. And so as the waves approach the beach, obviously the bottom of the wave is hitting the sand, so it kind of slows it down, and the top of the wave is keeping going. So gradually it just tips over, and that's why it breaks. So I was having a think about this actually, and the other thing that the North Berwick guidance said, so they only had 2 bits of guidance, and the first bit about when to take the boats out in their basic rules. The first one was, what was it? The one I was thinking, don't take the boats out if the weather's due to deteriorate. And the other one was, be very aware that when there's a northeasterly swell coming in, the effect will get greater on a falling tide. So as the tide's going out and there's actually less water around where you're rowing, particularly when we're coming back into the harbour, then that swell will have more of an effect on when there's actually less of the water there than it does when you've got about 5 meters of water there, the swell's just coming along the top. But when you've only got 2 meters, which is what we have when we're coming back into the harbour at the end of a session, then that swell is actually a sort of bigger percentage of that 2 meters, if you know what I mean. So particularly when it's a falling tide, when you're going out at the beginning of a session, it would be like that, but the conditions are only going to get better as the water, as the tide fills up. But as the tide's going out, then the conditions may be getting worse without you really realising it. And keep aware at all times and expect the unexpected. I was sort of looking I'd looked up the North Berwick rules after Veronica had her encounter with these 2 large waves that sort of came from nowhere a couple of months ago. Veronica, do you want to say anything about this at all?
Yeah, I think, seeing your wave diagram again really does, I think it explains it. And I think it may well be that it was compounded as well by something else going on. But when we were out, I think it was, we'd had strong winds a couple of days before, in fact, the day before. And when we were out at Portobello, we'd rowed out to Portobello, a swell was developing. Definitely, we noticed that because it felt really quite calm. In fact, it felt a lot calmer than it ought to have been given the water the previous day. And then on our way back, I was conscious that we were quite far out. So I came much, much further in just to be in line with the harbour mouth so that, we could get in a straight line. And I suspect that I was getting near to that kind of 3rd wave in from the left and maybe even further into the shore from there when it happened. Because we were just rowing away and one of these waves just hit us sideways and came into the boat, or large bits of it did. And the 2 and 3 fell out of their seats. Actually, it was such a big kind of, hard kind of knock on the boat. And it was just at that point that, I became aware of the even bigger wave coming up behind. So turned the boat right into that wave, and that was absolutely fine, but it did feel a bit Hawaii 5-0. In fact, Pete was on the boat, and I think he started doing the music, which actually made everybody laugh and calm down a bit, which was good because, apart from me, that is. So I think that what you've just showed me there really explains it. And when I came off the boat, when I got into the harbour, I bumped into Stuart Riley and David Banks, who'd both seen this thing happen. And David Banks said that it is actually something that every now and again tips one of the sailing boats because they're not expecting it. And it's just something to look out for. I think we probably just need to be more aware of this. And it actually is quite good for somebody to have had the experience so that we have and recovered from it, so that we have that lesson, I suppose, and just what a difference it can make. Always be looking out for the unexpected. So
definitely, because when after that had happened to you, that's when I went and had a look at the North Berwick guidance, and they they definitely say that the effect will be greater. You know, the effect of the swell will be greater on a falling tide. So I think when you were rowing, you were the last session of the day, weren't you? So you were sort of at the end of the tide. So
That's it. Yeah, the tide was really coming out then. So that, yeah.
yeah.
absolutely.
So that was interesting because that very much tied in, and the fact that they had that in their guidance made me think that possibly that was the problem that they'd had when one of their boats, I think one of their boats had gone over. They don't have the advantage of having a harbour, of course. They have to land back on the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, like you say, it's every experience is a good learning experience,
Isn't it? Yeah.
even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. So really, just what I've said at the end. Well, I've also said stay further out than the harbour. I've said that not for when there's a swell, but actually when you've got big waves happening. I think that the nearer you are to the beach, the more effect those waves are going to have. So if we've got one of those days where we've got a northerly wind coming in, so you just really have to row out to sea, turn around, come back. The best thing to do is actually not go out too far, but also not come too far back in. Like don't turn really near to the beach, just stay maybe around about level with the harbour, turn there, go back out to sea, turn there, come back in, and then just stay away from the beach area when you've got these waves. And really just keep aware at all times and expect the unexpected, because I think that's actually interesting that David Banks said these waves just appear every now and then. So it's, we should just keep on our toes at all times and just keep vigilant, keep looking out, I suppose, and expect the unexpected. Right. Steering somewhere when you need to get somewhere across the winds and waves. So this is where my brilliant diagram comes in here with the worms on it. So these worms are meant to represent waves. So on this day that looks like a lovely sunny Musselburgh day, I've drawn some big waves onto the photo. So we're pretending that we've got big waves coming in from the north, and on these days you usually come out and you'll go out here so that you're going out into the waves, and then you'll turn around, you'll come back in. But sometimes what you tend to do is this, and then you'll turn around and you'll end up there, and then you sort of do that. And you can end up really where you're not expecting to be, particularly when you're coxing, when you can't even really see which angle the waves are at behind you. So sometimes you end up going off to the side, and then you're faced with being here, and you actually need to get back to here, and the waves are coming in from your side. So you can't just row back across, because then you would be side onto the waves the whole time. So I've drawn these little green lines on this, which probably under exaggerate how much you have to zigzag. But if you're here and then you want to be back to the harbour, rather than just going straight across the waves, you have to really zigzag. So go at 45 degrees to the waves, go in, turn, go back out. You would probably be coming back out here somewhere, actually, not just the little zigzag I've put on. And then you would be going back in, then you would turn, you would come back out, then you would go back in. And when you get to here, again, you would just have to do a little turn. You've got the harbour wall protecting you a bit by then, and you would come in. You get all sorts of weird wave patterns around here, even when the wind's coming in from the east. The waves kind of curve round here slightly, but you've generally got quite a lot of shelter when you're in there. So it's just to say, just zigzag like that. Don't go side onto the waves if you can at all help it. And what I'll actually do is correct these green lines to make them look like something more sensible for the next one. Does anyone have any questions at all? Any thoughts? Nope. Right, we'll just so I know this is a lot of information. It's actually sort of I think it's because it's all written down. A lot of it's actually quite logical when you're out there. It just does seem a lot when it's all written down and you've just got it presented by me droning on. So the winds at Fisher Row. So I'll actually just move on to the next slide for a minute. This one. So this just shows where we are in relation to the land. So this aerial photo is north-south, which really shows us how much of our sort of 360 degrees is actually quite sheltered. So if you've got winds coming from southeast or winds coming from the southwest, and even to a certain degree winds coming from the west, we're really quite sheltered by all the land. It's only this really open bit at the top where we're really going to get the full force of the wind, which does explain why it's the easterly and like the North Sea winds coming in from here and the northerlies that really cause us the most problems. Right, I'll just go back up to this one. So, so when you've got southerly winds blowing off the land, southwesterly winds, then they can be quite strong, but the sea can actually be quite flat. And we've got the hill, particularly at New Hales, which gives us a lot of shelter. So if you're looking at the forecast and it's a southerly wind and it's 18 or 19 miles an hour on the Met Office forecast, so long as you stay into the shore, then we can row in that, we can go out in that, and the sea will actually stay quite calm. And what you do notice if you go further out is when the sea's calm, but the wind catches the boat and also it blows the rowers around. So it's not particularly pleasant all the time. And I wouldn't really go out in much more than that, but we can definitely row when it's, when the winds are about 18 or 19 miles an hour from the south. Again, with westerly winds blowing from Portobello, they're quite easy to judge, like particularly because we come out that way out of our harbour, we can just row to Portobello. We'll be rowing into the wind on the way there, and then on the way back, we're just being pushed along. But because they're partly like they've come up the Forth, or they're sort of partly blowing off the land, they're quite easy to deal with. So I've said 17 miles an hour. That's fairly random. I wouldn't really go out much more than that, I don't think. So the easterly and northeasterly winds that blow in off the North Sea or blow across from Fife, you can get quite large waves with them and they can be fun, I've said, but coxing back in with a following sea can be very unnerving as the rudder has very little effect. So this is what David was talking about earlier. I really hate coxing in a following sea, actually. You can't see, you try to keep your boat at 90 degrees to the waves, but because the waves are coming from behind you, you can't see them. But you can do it. Now, I've said 10 or 11 mile per hour limit if it's from the north or east. I mean, earlier when we were rowing in September, there were days when that was all it was. It was blowing from the northeast. It was about a 10 mile an hour wind, and you had waves slapping on the side of the harbour, sending water over the walls. So they do have a much bigger effect. And then also once they've calmed down, in a few days afterwards, they produce this swell. So even when the winds have died right down, you get this really calm swell that goes just up and down, which gives you the large waves on the beach. And I've said again, the effect will be greater on the falling tide when we've got less water near the beach. So if you're going out, if you've decided you can row and the conditions are quite tough, if it's quite windy, then always row against the wind to begin with. Like when you're heading out, row against the wind, because it means that when you turn round to come home, then you've got the wind with you. It's going to push you home. What you don't want to do is go out with the wind to begin with. So you've got the wind pushing you along, you think this is great, we're doing really well, and then you turn around to get home and you're coming against the wind and it's a huge struggle, like the wind and the waves, and it's a huge struggle. So just always make sure that you get the tough bit of the row at the beginning. And some days you have no option other than to row into the direction of the wind, as the waves will be too high to do anything else. So if the wind is coming from the west and it's quite high, then you just have to row to Portobello. That's all we can do, and then row back. And if the wind's coming from the north and you've got the waves coming in from the north and you've decided it's safe to go out, you just have to go in that direction. You have to row out to sea, turn round, come back in, turn round, go straight out again. You really can't do anything else. It's still safe to do, but you don't really have any options. Anyone else? Anyone like to say anything while I check the time?
Just a couple of quick things. As George said, it does sound quite daunting, but just bear in mind that if you do decide you want to have a go at coxing, then for as long as you want an experienced cox to be with you, somebody else will be in the boat with you to give you support. So it's not, you're not having to make all those decisions on your own straight away. Sometimes if you are going out and back, as George says, with quite strong, quite bouncy waves, as you'll know, sometimes we'll come back into the harbour for a bit of a breather. Sometimes that's not a bad idea. And it just allows people just to get a bit of a breather, calm down, get a drink. As long as it's safe. Sometimes if you have got big waves, getting in and out the harbour can be slightly challenging to get that angle that George has described. But bear that in mind as an option, that you can go back in and out of the harbour to kind of break the session up as well. But the main thing I think to say there is just there will be an experienced cox in the boat with you as long as you want there to be. So don't worry that you're making these kind of difficult decisions only having cox twice or whatever. Unlike in 2014 or whatever it was, when people were rowing out at Portsoy and Dunbar in quite mountainous seas with very little experience. You're in a very favoured position compared to them.
Yeah, I think what I would add there is I was out fairly recently, and there was a northerly, and we were going out and back and out and back. But the nature of the crew was that I didn't have a very experienced crew, and it was taking a long time to make a turn. And on the basis of that, I decided to call it, because we were side on for much too long, for my comfort anyway. Even though I had rowed in much worse conditions, I just felt it wasn't appropriate for the crew. So I think it's always difficult to call a row, particularly in the middle of it. And it's also very difficult for individuals in the boat to call it when they're not comfortable. And we have one of them not so long ago as well. And a fairly new rower finds it very difficult to say, no, I'm not comfortable. So you have to read the body language and the panic in the eyes, and judge appropriately and take the decision.
Yeah, these are all good points. And in the winter as well, when there's not many boats in the harbour, and actually lots of the boats have been taken out this year, we always have the option of rowing around the harbour. And I know if this goes on for a few weeks at a time, people get a bit bored, but it's actually quite a good thing to do. You're still getting experience and you can practice a few manoeuvres, and it is better to do that than take people out and either they're scared or you don't want to be there. So that's always an option as well. Yeah, and it's perfectly okay to just decide halfway through a row that you think the conditions aren't right, and then you can just call it a day, go back in. Right.
I think that's a really good point, Owen, about the experience and the ability of the crew to cope. And you do have to make a judgment based on that. There may be a day where you have a very strong crew and you're quite confident in the turns are executed quickly, everybody's quite comfortable. Another day it might be exactly the same conditions but a very different crew. So that's a really, really good point, and is trying to judge how the crew are feeling. And as a cox, if you have any slight discomfort, get back in.
Yeah. And as the club's getting bigger as well, the chances that the Coxes are going to be out with people that they don't know particularly well is going to increase. So I suppose what we should all be quite good is passing on information and asking. You know, if we're not sure, we should ask the other Coxes for information too. Right, I've got terms of the boat. Seeing as we're doing this on Zoom and we're trying to be quite quick. I mean, people basically know this. I'll just do the bit at the bottom. So port and starboard in the boat, they're all to do with the, like as the Cox sees it. So port is to the left, starboard's to the right, according to the Cox, and port and left both have 4 letters. That's how I always remember it. And if you're asked to do a port turn, you're turning to the left, and the starboard turn is to the right, and the people on that side hold water. That's it. I was trying to think of the way I used to remember that was at the beginning was like if you like when you were a kid and you were going down and you would hold on to the banister at the end and swing round, then the side that you would hold on to swing round is the side that you would get the rowers to hold. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever. Right, I'm not going to go through the commands because we know that anyway. Right, I'm not going to go through rowing technique either. I'll just go through the last few things, how to deploy the anchor, and I think how to do a man overboard, and I think that'll probably do. I'm not really expecting people to remember this, but it's quite useful just to know, even if you've just heard me going through it once. It's quite a useful thing to know. So, so with the deploying the anchor, so we always have the anchors at the back of the boat, not the back, the bow. So if for some reason you can't make any headway or you just have to stop, then you may have to put the anchor out to stop you from moving anywhere, possibly if somebody was injured. So what you do is you turn the boat round so that the bow is facing into the wind, and the bow rower attaches the anchor to the boat. So our anchor ropes have got a carabiner on, and you can clip them onto the tow eye at the front. And then the anchors have got, I think it's 2 meters of chain right next to the anchor. I could be wrong about that. So you basically, the bow rower, suppose they'll ship their oar first. Then they get the anchor and you lower it over, chain first, and then the rope. And you let out enough rope to be 3 times the depth of the water. I think our anchor ropes are 20 meters long from what I remember. And we worked that out by, I suppose that the deepest that the water is going to be around about near us is about 5 meters. And they say to have around about 5 meters, 5 times as much rope. So maybe they're actually 25 meters thinking about it. And that gets your anchor at a good angle to bite in. So you can let all the rope out. That is fine, so long as you're not trying to keep yourself off some rocks which are nearby, in which case you would just put out a wee bit. So then the boat will drift downwind until the rope gets pulled taut and the anchor bites. Our anchors are called Danforth anchors, and we got them because they're meant to be really good at biting into sand, because obviously we row over sand most of the time. So that's why we've got those big clunky anchors, because they're actually good at biting into sand. And in terms of the Cox, to decide if your anchor's holding or dragging, what you do is you can look out the side of your boat. For instance, if say we were near the harbour, and you line up 2 objects on the shore, one near, one further away, and you can see whether they're moving in relation to each other. So for instance, you could line up the mussels, what's it called? Sculpture, with something like a house on the shore, and if they're staying in the same position in relation to each other, then you're stable. If they're moving, then it's a possibility that your anchor is actually dragging. Right, this is a really grainy picture from Ullapool. I think that's just showing them putting their anchor over the side. They've got the same sort of anchor as us. And you
Sorry, George. If your anchor is dragging, I mean, what can you do about it? Other than perhaps feeling the need to call for rescue.
You'd have to start again. I mean, if you were really near rocks, then you'd have to call for a rescue thing. But I mean, if you can row away, then you would just go further out and start the exercise again.
Okay.
The time when we did try and put the anchor out, we went through this and tried, and we were over sand, and it was fine. It bit in quite well, and those anchors are quite good. Some of the other anchors I've seen are like they look more like an octopus, but they're not meant to be as good for biting into sand, which is why we got the Danforth ones that we did. But I'll go through how you get the anchor back out. So I suppose if it was dragging, you would, hopefully if you had enough sea room, then you would just go through the operation of taking it out, rowing out and trying again. So to bring in the anchor, obviously once you've put the anchor out and it's bitten, it's got the whole weight of the boat on it with the weight of the waves and the wind pushing it. So you have to actually row towards the anchor. So that I've put the two aft rowers, so like stroke and 3 would do the rowing towards the anchor so that there's less bite on it, and then the bow rower would lift the anchor out of the water because you need the pressure to be taken off for it to do that. And then when the anchor's back in the boat, all the rowers can get back to rowing. We've never actually had to use the anchor at all in anger. Right, can't actually see the bottom of this. Right, we'll just, again, we have tried the man overboard procedure. I mean, if this was a normal time, we could go out and we could go through these procedures to try them out, which is what we've done in the past. We'll make sure that we do that as soon as we're back to normal rowing. Then we'll make sure that we do these and get people experience at putting the anchor out and also trying the man overboard procedure. So, man overboard, if somebody falls overboard, or in our case, we might meet somebody in the water who needs to be rescued, there's quite a lot of water users around and about, then the cox will instruct one person to stow their oar and keep visual contact with the man overboard at all times. So this is really important, particularly if there's a lot of waves. So that person keeps their eye on them, and actually what they have to do is point at them. So you do actually point at the person just to keep your concentration, and that is all that person is doing. They are just keeping an eye on the man overboard. So the remaining crew will row under instruction. Again, your rowing crew is going to be unbalanced at that point, so you might just get 2 of your rowers to row. And you basically sort of row round in a circle. You sort of circle that person, getting nearer to them. And ideally, you want them to end up on the leeward side of the boat, so that the leeward side is the side that you've got the windward side, which the wind is blowing onto, and you've got the leeward side, which is the sheltered side. So you want your man overboard to end up on the sheltered side, because the boat would actually be going towards them. Whereas if they were on the windward side, you would constantly be blown away from the man overboard. We've got to use a throw line if necessary. No, we haven't actually got a throw line in the boat, so that's maybe something we should get. You could use the anchor line. When we've tried this before, we've also just the person has grabbed onto one of the oars and sort of got themselves towards the boat that way. Now, not that line. Be careful not to unbalance the boat when bringing somebody on board. What I might actually do is, let's see if I can. There we are. So you've got your person, at this point you've got your person near to your boat, like at the edge of your boat. You have to make sure that you're not going to tip the boat too much when you're bringing them on board. There's actually a video that was done in Anstruther when we were there. The Coast Guard did a demonstration of them getting people into the boat. So they tried it in several ways. To begin with, they tried bringing them over in the middle of the boat. So what they did was they hooked their legs over the boat, and then two of the crew members grabbed their hands and they actually basically leant back. They used their bodies as a counterweight. Rather than pulling the person up, they actually just grabbed hold of their arms and leant back and used their weight to pull the person out of the water. They tried it twice. They tried it once, bringing the person in the middle of the boat, which is the lowest bit. And they tried it again, bringing them in a bit further up, which meant that the weight wasn't all in the middle. I'm just trying to remember which one was more. Both of them worked. And I think at one point, like, the gunwale was near the water, but then it didn't actually go under. And I can find a link to that video. They were obviously doing it without any oars in the boat, which made it a bit easier. But I think when we tried with David a few years ago, David jumped into the sea one May, which I think was a bit cold. And my memory is, David, that we managed to get you back in pretty easily, and we did it with somebody sitting, like I've written here, we did it with somebody sitting on the opposite gunwale as a counterweight for bringing you back in. You remember whether it was easy bringing you back in?
It was very cold. I remember that. And I think we were helped by the fact that I think it was Pete who dragged me back in, whose upper arms are probably stronger than most people's. But it isn't a bad idea to have whoever's the strongest person in the boat actually doing it. But yeah, putting somebody on the other side, moving the weight to the other side of the boat, just so as the person pulls you back in, the boat's isn't unbalanced. That it worked okay. It worked okay. But it's not, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, and I think they definitely had two people bring them in. They had one person on each arm.
Yeah.
And then leaning back and just pulling the person over. And it was a lot easier to get the people's legs into the boat first, because then you're just bringing their body, basically, you're bringing the body weight up over the gunwale.
Presumably, George, then in that case, they braced their feet against the side where the person's coming in then, did they?
Yeah.
And then pulled back. Yeah,
they probably had their feet up against the gunwales, actually. I can't. The video was recorded because it was at the training weekend for the SCRA, so it's definitely online somewhere. So I'll put a link to it on Teamwork, actually.
Yeah, so it's almost a bit like if you're on a clipper or an old-fashioned sailing boat and you're pulling down the sail, and you're bracing your feet and you're just using your body weight, really.
Yeah.
So that's a really effective picture in my mind. Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Good. Right. Now I think the next slide is actually right, I'll go back to, I think that's virtually us. I think the next slide is, this is emergency action. So this is all sorts of other things. I won't go over these today because that's us. We're at 11:30, and I think that's probably enough for people to take in. And these actually need to be probably expanded a bit. Really, there's things like swamping in deep water, like we just wouldn't we wouldn't really be out. I think the only time a boat has turned over in deep water was when it was down in the Solway and they were doing the exciseman's chase. So they were probably in conditions they wouldn't normally have been out in. Capsizing in shallow water is the thing that's happened most frequently, and that's people landing on the beach in surf. That's been where almost all of the capsizes have happened, and there haven't actually been that many. So I won't go over this today. And then I think that's really the end. So there are a lot of rules here, and obviously you need to try and get them right, but it's so much clearer when you're actually out in the boat. And every time you do something, I mean, I think once you start coxing, you notice things that you do yourself, you notice things that other coxers do, the way things happen in the boat. And that is really the best way to learn, just observe. And if something doesn't go right, learn from that. And really just go out and gain experience and enjoy being out in the boat. Because it is good fun. This makes it sound like you'd never want to do coxing, and really it's not like that at all. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much. Really good. Really, really good.
Okay. Does that...
No, I agree, and that was really good. So thank you, George. Can I just ask a couple of quick questions?
Yeah.
Is there a reference book that we could possibly get that would help us with learning about things like the waves, the tide, the weather? I mean, I appreciate it might be more of a sailing book than a rowing book. I just wondered if there's something you've ever come across that we
I've actually got a couple of books here, which I think they're Royal Yachting Association ones, and I have to confess I've never read them. I tend to look things up as I need them, usually online. But yeah, I have got these two books, which are the RYA Guide to the Weather, and I think it's the navigation book. So yeah, they're here. I always think when we finally get round to having a boat shed, we can have a little library, but I've got them here, and even more miraculously, I know where they are in my house, so I can pass them to people, or yeah, you want to have a look?
Okay, no, thank you. Or yeah, just let us know the titles of them as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I've got them here. I can just pass them to you, Andy, because it's probably useful for a few people to look at them. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. The other thing is just following up on the point so David made. Really, could we, or is it worth pairing up novice cox with more experienced coxes over a period of time, just so we can work together and they can point out what we're not doing well and things like that?
Like a buddying system kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. Yes, we can certainly do that. I mean, whether people would always manage to get out rowing at the same time, you know what I mean? Then
yeah.
But you could certainly have a buddy cox who you could ask question with, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. But no, thanks. That's been really good. So thanks.
Yeah, as a fairly novice cox, I've found everybody tremendously supportive. And when I had the idea of, I think initially George was going to come out with me, and we did do a couple of rows together. But every cox that I've been out with, every cox that came out with me initially to kind of be in charge of the boat, was tremendously helpful, and the feedback was great and supportive. So I can see where Andy's coming from, but my view would be that all of the coxes that I've been involved with or out with have been effectively buddies. I don't think I needed a particular buddy.
I'm just totally jinxed. Every time I'm down as, well, I have been down as named cox, the weather's actually called it off, the wheel locked, or we went into lockdown. So basically it's just never happened.
Oh. I know I was speaking to somebody up in Seal, the woman who runs there, and she said they've been in level 2 for ages, but it's been so stormy they haven't been out for about 2 months. But we'll hopefully get back out.
And actually, the time that I went out with Owen when we were allowed out. I think it was one of the rough days, and I was very impressed by Owen's zigzagging back into the harbour, exactly as is on your slide. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'll send you the payments later.
Thank you.
Can I just mention something? George, or people look at the Eskimouth email account. Did you get the thing about these lectures from Ely and Elsferry that are going to be happening?
Oh, I haven't looked at the Eskimouth account. Are they? What are they?
It was something that Kirsten, who rose over there, flagged up. Over the next 4 months, they're going to be having the Royal Yacht Club people there, and also people from RNLI to do a series of Zoom talks. I think they're on Tuesday nights, on things like tides charts, buoyage, which I hadn't come across, collision regulations, weather safety, and passage planning. So it was just in case anybody was interested. I think they're asking for £30 for the whole lot. Yeah, it was just another resource, really.
That sounds good.
I can put this document up on TMAP so people can have a look. But yeah, she was asking if at least maybe one person from the club might want to do it. But I thought I might sign up anyway, because I'm sure I need to know more about buoyage. It's not a thing I'm up on.
Yeah, that sounds really useful.
Good. Okay, I'll forward that on, and then yeah, people can have a look. Oh, the other thing was, I just thought, yeah, we could collect all this information on a bit of the members bit on the website. And also, I thought it might be useful to have just a little description of the kind of thing that Veronica talked about there, particular incidents, to have a little story about an incident, and just to collect that there so that we can sort of revisit and remind ourselves. Because all of this, it's all really, really interesting, but it's a kind of thing that, in about 2 hours time, I'll be saying, oh gosh, there was something about something, but I can't remember what it was. So if it's there, that would be really good.
Yeah, and also we are going to have this recorded as well. So
yeah,
do you still do reports on each row? Because I think when I first started, there was like almost a report on each row, like weather conditions, what happened.
No, we stopped doing that. That was quite a good thing to do. We could reinstate that again. We have the little waterproof books.
Yeah, well,
if people just did a little recording, it doesn't even have to be written down. If we had a voice recording, that might be easier to do. And again, it can go on the website as a file, and that we can have a little audio diary or whatever, because often writing things can be a bit onerous.
Yeah,
but if you can just do a little chat into your phone, then that's often just as good.
That could be a nice idea, yes. And originally it was the Coxes that did it, but we could have anybody doing the report, if there wasn't anything major that had to be reported, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, at the moment, because of COVID, we have to record who was in each boat each time. So there is a requirement for the Cox to post something. So I suppose an added line or two about the weather conditions or anything else of note will probably be easy enough to add into that.
Yeah, I think the little reports we used to do, they were actually quite nice. Like we did used to put a bit of a story in them sometimes. So they're quite a nice record. And I suppose having them digitally is better than them being in a book, which I don't even know where the books are now, to be honest. They'll be here somewhere.
And if there are specific incidents, like the incident with Veronica and the waves, and I suppose even that day when Jane went under the boat coming out, well, she didn't go under the boat, but you know what I mean. Is there anything like that that's recorded so that people are aware of things?
Yeah, we should like, it's sort of like an accident book, more an incident book, more like an incident book. Yeah, we haven't got one. Again, we could start one. It's probably quite a useful thing for the Coxes to have. I can still remember pretty much anything I would want to put in it, even from years ago, about things that have happened. So we could put them in as examples. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is anybody kayaking at the moment?
Um,
I haven't been out for ages, but I really want to get out again.
yeah, I've got mine at Dunbar now, so it's quite interesting with when the sea is that allows it. So it's quite nice around there. But I haven't been out for 2 or 3 weeks.
You get more dolphins at Dunbar.
It's actually really fascinating coastline. George, can I just say a big thank you? That was absolutely superb. But I've really got to go. So thanks a lot. Lovely to see you all, you guys.
Yeah.
And ciao for now. Bye-bye.
Friday, Brian.
Brian, bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you, George. That was great. I think everybody would agree. Round of applause for George, and thank you very, very much indeed for pulling all that together and getting that across to us. I'll endeavour to make sure we have this recorded. Where will I send it to, or what do we want to do with it?
It's moving.
You're on mute.
Yeah, if you send it to me, I'll create a new website area in members, and we'll start collecting stuff there.
Okay.
So yeah, that'd be brilliant.
But we transfer it to you because it'll be a big file.
Yeah, it'll be a
might
big
be
one,
late.
yeah.
Might be later today because I got to go and do something in a minute. But yeah. Okay.
Good.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody, and enjoy your rowing.
Maybe see you.
Put my sweat top on just so it's been worn in the last few months, but hey, it's not going to get worn anytime soon, probably before Christmas by the way things are going. But anyway, enjoy.
You can go out kayaking, can't you?
Yeah, well, I can maybe go out off Portobello. I'd be allowed to do that, I think. So I'll have a wee peek out there and see if anybody wants to come kayaking off Portobello.
Andy, I think you're the only one who's here who's not down for a row next weekend. You away next weekend?
She's Edinburgh. Oh no, sorry.
Andy, sorry.
Andy.
Yes, I'm not around.
Sorry?
I'm not around next weekend.
All right, okay, fair enough. And just say if anybody's not signed up for like the Christmas social and stuff like that, get your names down, and hope to see you all on the water soon. But thanks a lot, George. See you soon, everybody.
Yeah, thanks,
Enjoy,
George.
everybody.
George.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello.